5 different species had traveled across the galaxy for this moment, each carrying the weight of their civilization's anger toward humanity. And now they sat in judgment within the curved walls of Station Omega-7's highest tribunal chamber. The air itself seemed to hum with tension, as holographic displays showed evidence of human crimes across 17 star systems. Burned worlds, violated treaties, and destroyed monuments that had stood for millennia before humans ever learned to make Fire Commander Vel shifted her crystalline form against the judgment seat, her translucent body refracting the chamber's blue lighting into rainbow patterns that danced across the polished floor, while her species' collective consciousness whispered through quantum channels about the necessity of what was to come. The Ashanti people had always been peaceful, their crystal cities growing organically from pure thought and harmony. But humans had shattered 3 of their meditation worlds during territorial disputes, leaving psychic scars that would take generations to heal. Admiral Kor's massive frame dominated the second judgment seat, his thick gray hide bearing the ritual scars of 100 battles, each mark representing a victory for the Belthor Empire that had ruled the Outer Rim for over 2,000 years. His people respected strength above all else, but humans had shown them a different kind of strength, the reckless, unpredictable power of desperation that could make prey animals dangerous beyond all reason. And this unsettled the natural order that kept the galaxy-stable High Magistrate Thera floated in her specialized aquatic chamber, her blue-green skin rippling with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed complex legal concepts faster than any spoken language, while nutrient-rich water cycled through gills that had evolved in the crushing depths of her homeworld's ocean trenches. The Nereid Coalition prided itself on law and order, their vast underwater cities built on principles of justice and careful deliberation. But humans had ignored 17 different cease and desist orders, bulldozing through legal frameworks that had maintained peace for centuries. General Voss, perched on his modified seat with forearms folded and compound eyes scanning multiple data streams simultaneously, his insectoid features betraying no emotion, while his mind calculated probabilities and strategic outcomes with the cold precision his species was famous for. The Mantis Collective operated through perfect coordination and shared purpose, every individual working toward the greater good of their hive mind society. But humans were chaos incarnate, unpredictable, individualistic, and apparently incapable of thinking beyond their own immediate needs. Elder Nyx existed as pure energy contained within a specialized field generator, her consciousness spanning multiple dimensions while her voice resonated through harmonic frequencies that touched the very fabric of space-time itself. The Photon Consortium had transcended physical form eons ago, becoming beings of light and thought who viewed the universe from a perspective of infinite patience and cosmic understanding. Yet even they had been pushed beyond tolerance by humanity's relentless expansion and casual destruction. Ambassador David Chen sat alone at the defendant's table, a middle-aged human wearing a simple black suit that looked almost comically plain compared to the advanced technologies and exotic biology surrounding him. His brown hair was slightly graying at the temples, and his face carried the kind of lines that came from years of diplomatic work and sleepless nights spent trying to prevent exactly this kind of situation. The charges scrolled endlessly across holographic displays in hundreds of languages and communication methods. Unauthorized terraforming of Kepler 442b despite clear warnings from the Ashanti Meditation Council, military intervention in the Zeta Reticuli conflict that violated the non-interference directive established by the Nereid Coalition, destruction of ancient Mantis archaeological sites on 3 different worlds during mining operations, and the complete disregard for Photon Consortium energy-being habitats when establishing human colonies. Each crime carried documentation spanning thousands of years of galactic law, precedents set by civilizations that had learned to coexist through careful negotiation and mutual respect. The evidence was undeniable, captured by surveillance networks that monitored every inhabited system, recorded in the collective memories of species that never forgot a single detail, and verified through quantum analysis that could detect lies at the molecular level. Commander Vel's crystalline voice chimed like wind through a mineral garden as she began to speak. Her words translated into every language known to galactic civilization. The defendant species has been found guilty of systematic violations of interstellar law, willful destruction of protected sites, and aggressive expansion without regard for established territorial boundaries. Admiral Kor's deep growl added weight to the pronouncement, his battle-scarred features showing no mercy for the small human, who had somehow become the representative of his entire species. The Belthor Empire has recorded 17 separate incidents of human military forces engaging in unauthorized combat operations within neutral space. High Magistrate Thera's bioluminescent patterns flickered in complex legal formulations, while her translated words carried the authority of millennia of jurisprudence. The Nereid Coalition finds the evidence overwhelming and the pattern of behavior consistent with a species incapable of peaceful coexistence. General Voss spoke with the calculated precision of a hive mind that had never made an emotional decision. The Mantis Collective has analyzed human behavior patterns and determined a 97% probability of continued violations regardless of warnings or sanctions. Elder Nyx's energy form pulsed with colors beyond the visible spectrum, while her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Photon Consortium has observed humanity's path through spacetime and foresees only continued conflict and destruction if left unchecked. The 5 judges exchanged glances through their various sensory organs and communication methods, each species confirming what they had already decided before the trial began. Humanity was too dangerous to be allowed continued existence in galactic society. Commander Vel raised one crystalline arm, the gesture causing harmonic resonances throughout the chamber as she prepared to deliver the final judgment that would end humanity's brief and violent journey among the stars. By unanimous decision of this tribunal, representing the combined authority of 5 galactic civilizations, we hereby sentence the human species to immediate execution of all spacefaring representatives and permanent restriction to their homeworld system. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, which is exactly what they were, and Ambassador Chen sat quietly listening to the translation through his earpiece, while calculating how much time Earth would have to prepare its defenses. Admiral Kor was already reaching for the ceremonial gavel. That would make the sentence official when the human representative did something completely unexpected. He raised his hand like a student asking a question in school. "Excuse me," David Chen said in a voice so calm it seemed to pause time itself. "Would Sunday work better for you?" The 5 most powerful beings in the galaxy suddenly found themselves staring at a human who had just asked if they could reschedule his execution like it was a routine business meeting. Silence stretched through the tribunal chamber like a physical thing, broken only by the quiet hum of life support systems and the barely audible whisper of Elder Nyx's energy field, fluctuating in what could only be described as cosmic bewilderment. Ambassador David Chen sat patiently at the defendant's table, his hands folded neatly in front of him, as if he had just asked about the weather rather than requesting to reschedule his own execution, and his calm demeanor seemed to make the situation even more surreal. Commander Vel's crystalline form flickered through several different colors before settling on a deep amber that indicated confusion in Ashanti emotional spectrums, her consciousness reaching out through quantum channels to confirm that her translation systems were working properly. The concept of rescheduling death was so foreign to her people that their collective mind struggled to process the logical framework necessary to understand what the human had actually said. Admiral Kor's massive hand froze halfway to the ceremonial gavel, while his scarred features twisted into an expression that had never appeared on a Belthor face before. Complete and utter bewilderment mixed with what might have been the beginning of offended dignity. In 2,000 years of military service across 17 different wars, he had seen soldiers beg for mercy, threaten revenge, or face death with stoic acceptance. But never had anyone asked if a more convenient time slot was available for their execution. High Magistrate Thera's bioluminescent patterns began cycling rapidly through colors that didn't exist in standard translation protocols, her aquatic chamber bubbling with increased oxygen flow, as her breathing rate accelerated in response to stress patterns her species hadn't experienced in centuries. The Nereid legal system was built on precedent and procedure, with carefully documented responses to every possible situation that might arise in a tribunal. But somehow they had never considered the possibility that a condemned defendant would treat their death sentence like a scheduling conflict. General Voss's compound eyes swiveled independently as he accessed multiple data streams simultaneously, searching through the Mantis Collective's vast database of tactical scenarios and behavioral predictions for anything that might explain what the human was doing. His species had modeled millions of possible responses to execution orders, ranging from escape attempts to suicide attacks, but their probability matrices had somehow failed to account for someone asking about weekend availability. Elder Nix's energy form pulsed with confused harmonics that sent ripples through multiple dimensions, while her consciousness explored different timeline possibilities to see if this moment made sense in any conceivable version of reality. The Photon Consortium existed outside normal temporal limitations, experiencing past and future as simultaneously occurring events. Yet even their cosmic perspective couldn't provide context for a death row request about calendar scheduling. Ambassador Chen glanced at his watch, a simple analog timepiece that seemed almost primitive compared to the quantum chronometers and dimensional time flow calculators surrounding him, then looked back up at the 5 judges with the patient expression of someone waiting for a reasonable response to a reasonable question. "I'm sorry if that seems like an odd request," he said in the same conversational tone he might use to discuss lunch plans. "But Saturday is really problematic because my daughter has a soccer game, and I promised her I'd be there to watch." The words hit the assembled judges like a series of small explosions, each species processing the information through their own cultural filters and finding the result increasingly incomprehensible. Commander Vell's crystalline structure began resonating at frequencies that indicated deep philosophical disturbance, her people's collective consciousness fragmenting as they tried to understand how someone facing species extinction could prioritize a child's recreational activity. The Ashanti valued harmony above all else, their entire civilization built around the principle of maintaining perfect balance between competing needs and desires. But this human was suggesting that personal family obligations outweighed the judgment of 5 galactic civilizations. Admiral Kor's breathing apparatus whistled with what sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter, though Belthor military doctrine strictly forbade any display of amusement during formal execution proceedings, especially when the condemned was displaying behavior that challenged everything they understood about survival instincts. His people respected courage in battle, but this went beyond courage into territory that might actually be classified as a completely new type of insanity that their war colleges had never encountered. High Magistrate Thera's legal training kicked in as she began searching through precedent databases for any historical record of similar situations, her conscious mind cycling through thousands of years of jurisprudence, while her unconscious thoughts wondered if humans might be fundamentally different from every other species in ways they had never considered. The Nereid legal system was designed to handle complex moral and ethical dilemmas, but they had apparently never dealt with a defendant who viewed their death sentence as a scheduling inconvenience that might conflict with youth sports activities. General Voss began calculating new probability matrices based on this unexpected data point, his hive mind consciousness sharing the information with millions of other Mantis individuals who immediately began developing new behavioral models for human psychology. Their species excelled at understanding group dynamics and collective decision-making, but humans appeared to operate according to individual emotional priorities that defied logical analysis and made strategic prediction almost impossible. Elder Nix extended her awareness across multiple dimensional planes, searching for any cosmic perspective that might explain why a representative of a doomed species would worry about missing his offspring's athletic performance rather than focusing on the survival of his entire civilization. The Photon Consortium had witnessed the rise and fall of countless species across billions of years, but none had ever demonstrated this particular combination of apparent wisdom and complete detachment from immediate reality. Ambassador Chen checked his watch again and made a small note in a paper notebook, the simple action somehow managing to emphasize how completely normal he considered this entire situation to be. "Emma's been practicing her corner kicks all season," he continued as if he were talking to old friends rather than cosmic judges who had just sentenced his species to death. "And the coach says she's really improved her accuracy since last month." The 5 judges exchanged glances through their various sensory systems, each trying to determine if the others were experiencing the same reality. Bending confusion that was making their respective thought processes stutter like overloaded computers. Commander Vel finally managed to speak, her crystalline voice carrying harmonic overtones of bewilderment that would have been impossible to translate without advanced xenolinguistic protocols. Ambassador Chen, do you understand that we have just sentenced your entire species to extinction? Yes, David replied with the kind of patient acknowledgement that parents use when confirming they heard their child's request for ice cream before dinner. But like I said, Saturday is really tough for me scheduling-wise. The chamber fell silent again as 5 of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations collectively tried to process what they were witnessing. Emergency protocols activated throughout Station Omega-7 as the 5 judges attempted to process what might have been the first genuine psychological crisis ever experienced by a galactic tribunal, with each species retreating into hasty consultation, sessions that pushed their respective translation systems beyond normal operational parameters. Commander Vel's crystalline form began cycling through color spectrums that indicated her people's collective consciousness was experiencing something between profound confusion and existential shock, while quantum communication channels buzzed with urgent discussions about whether humans might represent a completely unknown form of sentient life. The Ashanti had spent millions of years perfecting their understanding of consciousness and awareness, developing philosophical frameworks that could accommodate every known form of intelligent thought. But Ambassador Chen's behavior suggested they might need to completely revise their fundamental assumptions about how rational minds process reality. Admiral Kor activated his personal communication suite and began transmitting rapid-fire reports to Belthor High Command, his military training struggling to categorize what he was witnessing according to standard threat assessment protocols that had never been designed to handle enemies who treated their own execution like a minor scheduling inconvenience. His people had fought wars against species who valued honor above life, creatures who chose death before surrender, and beings who faced extinction with dignified acceptance. But none of their combat doctrine addressed how to respond to an opponent who was apparently more concerned about missing his daughter's sports activity than preserving his civilization. High Magistrate Thera's legal processors began accessing emergency consultation subroutines as she attempted to determine whether this situation required precedent from criminal law, diplomatic protocol, or possibly xenopsychology. Treatises that dealt with fundamental species-level mental disorders. The Nereid legal system was built on the principle that all rational beings would respond predictably to certain stimuli, particularly the threat of death. But human behavior was challenging the very foundations of jurisprudence that had maintained galactic civilization for millennia. General Voss entered a deep communion state with the Mantis Collective's primary consciousness hub, sharing sensory data and behavioral observations with millions of analytical minds that immediately began constructing new models for human psychology based on this unprecedented data point. Their species had always prided itself on being able to predict and understand the actions of any opponent through careful study of behavioral patterns. But humans were demonstrating decision-making processes that seemed to operate outside every known framework for rational thought. Elder Nyx expanded, her consciousness across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously, consulting with aspects of herself that existed in different temporal states to determine whether this moment represented some kind of cosmic anomaly, or if humans were genuinely this incomprehensible. The Photon Consortium had transcended physical limitations specifically to gain broader perspective on the nature of existence, but their expanded awareness was only making the human ambassador's behavior seem more mysteriously inexplicable rather than providing clarity. Ambassador Chen sat quietly during the extended consultation period, occasionally making notes in his paper notebook and checking his watch with the patient demeanor of someone accustomed to waiting for bureaucratic processes to run their course. After approximately 17 minutes of urgent interdimensional discussions, Commander Vel's voice chimed through the chamber with carefully controlled harmonic patterns that indicated her people had reached some kind of consensus about how to proceed. Ambassador Chen, she said with the kind of careful precision typically reserved for first contact situations with potentially dangerous unknown species, We need to understand your psychological state before we can continue with these proceedings. David looked up from his notebook with a slightly puzzled expression, as if he couldn't imagine why anyone would question his mental health for prioritizing his daughter's soccer game over his own execution. "I'm fine," he replied with the matter-of-fact tone that humans use when stating obvious information. "But Emma's been working really hard on her footwork, and she gets disappointed when I miss her games." Admiral Korr's massive frame shifted forward in his seat as his military mind attempted to apply standard interrogation techniques to extract useful information from what appeared to be a completely alien thought process. "Ambassador," he growled, with the authority of someone accustomed to having his questions answered immediately, "do you comprehend that the extinction of your species is at stake here?" "Of course," David said with a small nod that somehow managed to convey both understanding and mild annoyance at having to state the obvious. "But that doesn't change the fact that I told Emma I'd be at her game on Saturday." High Magistrate Thera's bioluminescent patterns began displaying complex legal queries as she attempted to determine whether human psychology might require completely different judicial approaches than those used for other known species. "Ambassador Chen," she said with the careful neutrality that Nereid legal training emphasized when dealing with potentially unstable defendants, "help us understand why you believe attending a recreational activity is more important than the survival of your civilization." David's expression shifted to the kind of patient look that people get when they're about to explain something they consider fundamentally obvious to someone who clearly doesn't understand basic concepts. "It's not more important," he said with the tone of someone clarifying a simple misunderstanding, "but I gave Emma my word that I'd be there, and breaking promises to your children is how you teach them that commitments don't matter." The 5 judges found themselves entering even deeper levels of consultation as they tried to process the concept that humans might view personal integrity as somehow separate from species survival, or that they could simultaneously acknowledge an existential threat while prioritizing individual relationships. General Voss's compound eyes began processing multiple data streams as he attempted to apply game theory models to human decision-making, patterns that seemed to operate according to entirely different rules than any previously encountered species. "Ambassador," he clicked with the mathematical precision his people brought to all communication, "your species faces complete extinction, yet you prioritize an individual offspring's temporary disappointment over collective survival." David shrugged with the casual gesture humans use when acknowledging that something might seem strange to outsiders, but makes perfect sense from their perspective. "Emma's 8 years old," he explained, as if this simple fact should clarify everything. "And she's been looking forward to this game all week because her team finally has a chance to beat the Riverside Rockets, who've won the league championship 3 years running." Elder Nix's energy form began pulsing with harmonics that indicated her consciousness was experiencing something equivalent to a philosophical headache, as she tried to understand how humans could simultaneously demonstrate advanced reasoning capabilities while apparently ignoring the most basic survival instincts. "Ambassador Chen," she resonated with frequencies that carried overtones of cosmic bewilderment, "we are attempting to comprehend how your species has survived long enough to reach interstellar travel when your decision-making processes appear to prioritize temporary emotional satisfaction over long-term strategic thinking." David smiled with the kind of gentle amusement that parents show when their children ask innocent questions about complex adult concepts. "That's exactly why we need to keep our promises to our kids," he said with conviction that seemed completely unshakable. "Because teaching them that love and loyalty matter more than convenience is how we raise the kind of people who build civilizations worth preserving." Something fundamental shifted in the tribunal chamber's atmosphere, as Ambassador Chen's words about raising civilizations worth preserving hung in the air like a philosophical challenge that none of the 5 judges had been prepared to encounter. Commander Fell's crystalline form began resonating at entirely different frequencies as her people's collective consciousness started examining human behavior through the lens of long-term species development rather than immediate threat assessment, and the pattern recognition algorithms that had initially classified humans as dangerously unpredictable began identifying potential wisdom in what had seemed like complete irrationality. The Ashanti had built their civilization on the principle that all actions should serve the greater harmony of existence. But perhaps humans were operating according to a different but equally valid framework that prioritized the cultivation of individual integrity as the foundation for collective strength. Admiral Kor's scarred features softened slightly as his military mind began reassessing human territorial expansion and defensive actions through the perspective of a species that viewed protecting their offspring as the primary strategic objective that justified any level of personal sacrifice or risk. The Belthor Empire had always respected courage in battle, but they had never encountered a species that demonstrated courage in the form of maintaining personal commitments even when facing existential threats. And this suggested a kind of strength that might actually be more formidable than traditional military power. High Magistrate Thera's legal training began identifying precedents from cases involving species whose moral frameworks operated according to principles that initially seemed illogical, but actually represented sophisticated approaches to maintaining social stability across multiple generations. The Nereid Coalition had spent centuries studying different forms of justice and social organization, and she was beginning to recognize that human behavior might represent a complex ethical system built around the principle that individual actions had cumulative effects on species-wide character development. General Voss accessed deeper levels of the Mantis Collective's behavioral analysis databases as he started modeling human decision-making according to game theory scenarios that extended across multiple generations rather than focusing on immediate tactical advantages. His people had always excelled at long-term strategic thinking, but humans appeared to be implementing a strategy so long-term that it prioritized cultural value transmission over short-term survival optimization, which suggested a level of confidence in their species' adaptability that was either insane or brilliant. Elder Nyx expanded her consciousness to examine human civilization from the perspective of cosmic timescales, and from that vantage point, she began to perceive patterns in human behavior that indicated they might be unconsciously implementing a sophisticated approach to species evolution that prioritized psychological resilience over immediate physical survival. The Photon Consortium had observed countless civilizations rise and fall across billions of years, and species that survived the longest were typically those that maintained strong internal value systems, even when facing external pressures that seemed to make those values impractical. Ambassador Chen continued making notes in his notebook, apparently oblivious to the fact that his simple explanation about keeping promises to children was causing 5 advanced alien civilizations to fundamentally reconsider their understanding of human nature and strategic thinking. Admiral Kor cleared his throat with a sound like distant thunder before speaking in a tone that carried less authority and more genuine curiosity than anything he had used during the formal proceedings. Ambassador, he said with the careful neutrality of someone testing a new hypothesis, help us understand how humans make decisions when survival and personal values come into conflict. David looked up with the expression of someone who was pleased that the conversation was finally moving toward topics he considered actually important, rather than dwelling on obvious facts about scheduling conflicts. That's easy, he replied with the kind of confidence that humans display when discussing subjects they've thought about extensively. We ask ourselves what kind of people we want our children to become, and then we try to be those people ourselves. Commander. Vel's crystalline voice carried new harmonic patterns that indicated her people's collective consciousness was experiencing something resembling revelation rather than confusion. So when humans chose to terraform contested worlds, despite our warnings, she chimed with frequencies that suggested genuine inquiry rather than accusation. You were attempting to create safe environments for your offspring rather than deliberately challenging our territorial claims. Obviously, David said with the slight impatience that humans show when people state the obvious as if it were a profound insight. We needed places where our kids could grow up without worrying about radiation exposure, atmospheric toxins, or orbital instability. High Magistrate Thera's bioluminescent patterns began displaying what appeared to be legal re-evaluation sequences as she processed the implications of reframing human territorial violations as parental protection strategies rather than aggressive expansion, and the military interventions in neutral space that violated the non-interference directive. She asked with the tone of someone building a case rather than prosecuting one. We couldn't just stand by and watch other species get wiped out, David explained, as if this should have been obvious to anyone with basic moral reasoning capabilities, because that's not the kind of universe we want to leave for Emma's generation. General Voss's compound eyes began tracking new data patterns, as he realized that human military actions might represent a form of species-level, moral education, rather than simple territorial aggression. The destruction of Mantis archaeological sites during your mining operations, he clicked with mathematical precision that now carried undertones of scientific curiosity. Was this also related to creating resources for offspring development? David nodded with the matter-of-fact acknowledgement that humans use when confirming information that should have been apparent from context. We needed the rare earth elements for building better schools and hospitals, he said with conviction that suggested he considered this a perfectly reasonable justification. And we didn't realize your people considered those sites sacred until after we'd already started extraction. Elder Nix's energy form began pulsing, with entirely different frequencies as she examined the cumulative pattern of human actions through the lens of species-level child-rearing strategies rather than deliberate cultural vandalism. Ambassador Chen, she resonated with harmonics that carried cosmic-scale perspective. Are you suggesting that every action your species has taken in space was motivated by the desire to create better conditions for future generations? Well, yeah, David replied, with the kind of casual confirmation that humans use when people finally understand concepts they've been trying to explain. Isn't that why everyone explores space? The 5 judges found themselves exchanging glances that carried entirely different meanings than the ones they had shared during the formal proceedings, as each species began recognizing familiar motivations beneath what they had previously interpreted as incomprehensible alien behavior. Commander Vell was remembering how her people's first expansion beyond their homeworld had been driven by the need to find new crystal formations that could support their growing consciousness. Collective Admiral Kor was recalling Belthor military doctrine that identified the protection of spawning grounds as the highest strategic priority that justified any level of resource expenditure or territorial risk. High Magistrate Thera was accessing legal precedents that established parental protection instincts as a legitimate defense for actions that might otherwise violate interspecies agreements. General Voss was calculating how many Mantis colonial expansions had been motivated by the need to establish new hive sites for developing larvae. Elder Nix was recognizing that even the Photon Consortium's transcendence to energy forms had originally been an attempt to create safer existence conditions for their offspring. Quantum communication channels throughout Station Omega-7 began humming with urgent data exchanges as each of the 5 judging species started conducting emergency consultations with their respective homeworlds, sharing behavioral analysis reports that suggested their fundamental understanding of human motivation might have been completely wrong from the beginning. Commander Vell's crystalline structure began displaying complex geometric patterns that indicated her people's collective consciousness was experiencing something unprecedented in their million-year history. The need to completely recalibrate their assessment of another species based on a single conversation about children's recreational activities. The Ashanti meditation councils were transmitting urgent philosophical inquiries across subspace networks, asking whether their interpretation of human territorial expansion as aggressive conquest might actually represent a profound misunderstanding of species-level parenting strategies that operated on timescales their peaceful civilization had never needed to consider. Admiral Kor was receiving tactical updates from Belthor military strategists who were hastily revising threat assessment protocols based on the possibility that human combat operations might be motivated by protective instincts rather than territorial ambition, which would fundamentally change how the Empire should respond to future encounters. His people had always respected opponents who fought with honor and courage, but they were beginning to realize that humans might be demonstrating a form of courage so alien to Belthor, thinking that they had completely misinterpreted it as reckless aggression when it was actually calculated sacrifice for future generations. High Magistrate Thera was consulting with the Nereid Coalition's most senior legal philosophers, who were hastily examining case precedents involving species whose moral frameworks prioritized long-term collective welfare over immediate individual survival, and finding disturbing gaps in their jurisprudence. The Nereid legal system prided itself on being able to accommodate any reasonable ethical framework, but they were discovering that their definition of reasonable might have been far too narrow to encompass the full spectrum of rational approaches to civilization building. General Voss had initiated deep communion protocols with the Mantis Collective's primary consciousness hub, sharing sensory data and behavioral observations with billions of analytical minds that were collectively experiencing something resembling intellectual vertigo as they tried to process the implications. Their species had always assumed that efficient resource allocation and logical decision-making were universal principles that any advanced civilization would naturally adopt. But humans were demonstrating that emotional priorities and individual relationships could somehow produce equally effective outcomes through completely different mechanisms. Elder Nyx was extending her awareness across multiple temporal dimensions, simultaneously consulting with versions of herself that existed in different time streams to examine human civilization from perspectives that spanned millions of years of potential future development. The Photon Consortium had transcended linear time specifically to gain broader understanding of cause and effect relationships, but their expanded consciousness was revealing that human behavior patterns might actually be more sophisticated than their own immortal perspective had initially suggested. Ambassador Chen glanced at his watch again and made another note in his paper notebook, apparently still concerned about the scheduling conflict that had started this entire philosophical crisis. Though his calm demeanor suggested he was pleased that the conversation was finally moving in productive directions. "You know," he said with the kind of casual observation that humans make when they think of something that might be relevant to the current discussion. Emma's team has been practicing a new formation that they're really excited to try out against the Riverside Rockets. The simple statement somehow managed to refocus the entire tribunal's attention on the fact that while they were conducting emergency species-wide consultations about fundamental questions of consciousness and motivation, this human was still primarily concerned about a children's soccer game scheduled for the weekend. Commander Vell's voice carried entirely new harmonic patterns as she asked a question that would have seemed impossible during the formal proceedings. "Ambassador Chen, would you tell us about your daughter?" David's face lit up with the kind of genuine smile that humans reserve for their favorite topics of conversation, and his entire posture shifted from diplomatic formality to parental pride. "Emma's 8 years old," he began with obvious affection, "and she's been playing soccer since she was 5, though she started out being more interested in picking flowers from the field than actually kicking the ball." Admiral Kor found himself leaning forward with interest, despite his military trainings, emphasis on maintaining proper tribunal decorum, as something about the human's tone activated emotional recognition patterns that transcended species barriers. "She's got this incredible determination," David continued with the kind of detailed enthusiasm that parents display when given the opportunity to discuss their children's achievements, like when she decided she wanted to be able to do corner kicks. "She spent 3 weeks practicing in our backyard every single day after school." High Magistrate Thera's bioluminescent patterns began displaying what her people would recognize as empathy responses, as her consciousness started connecting human, parental attachment behaviors with similar patterns from her own species' development. "Last month, she scored her first goal from a corner kick," David said with pride that seemed to radiate from his entire being. "And you should have seen her face when the ball went in, pure joy, like she'd just discovered that anything was possible if you worked hard enough for it." General Voss's analytical mind began recognizing parallels between human child-rearing practices and the Mantis Collective's methods for developing individual consciousness within their hive mind structure, both systems apparently designed to cultivate specific psychological traits that served broader community purposes. "That's why Saturday is so important," David explained with conviction that made his earlier scheduling concerns seem perfectly rational rather than absurdly misplaced. "Because Emma's been working toward this game all season, and I want her to know that the people who love her will be there to celebrate her achievements." Elder Nyx's energy form began resonating at frequencies that indicated profound recognition, as her cosmic perspective suddenly revealed the elegant simplicity of human motivation. They were building their civilization one individual relationship at a time, creating strength through the accumulation of personal commitments that formed unbreakable social bonds. The 5 judges realized they were witnessing something remarkable, a species that had apparently solved the fundamental problem of balancing individual needs with collective survival by making individual relationships so strong that they automatically served collective purposes. Commander Vel's crystalline voice carried wonder rather than confusion as she asked her next question. Ambassador, how do humans teach their children to make decisions when personal desires conflict with group needs? David smiled with the satisfied expression of someone who was finally being asked the right questions after a long period of confusion. We show them that taking care of each other isn't a sacrifice, he replied with the kind of certainty that comes from years of practical experience. It's how we build the kind of community where everyone gets to pursue their dreams without having to worry about basic safety and support. The tribunal chamber fell silent again, but this time, the silence carried possibility rather than bewilderment. As 5 alien civilizations began to understand that they might be witnessing the trial of a species that had discovered something profound about the nature of sustainable social organization. The weight of galactic history pressed down on Station Omega-7 as 5 alien civilizations found themselves standing at a crossroads that none of their ancient protocols had prepared them to navigate, with the simple question of weekend scheduling somehow having evolved into a fundamental reevaluation of how advanced species should interact with each other. Ambassador Chen's casual explanation about building communities through individual relationships had created ripple effects that were propagating through quantum communication networks spanning thousands of light years, carrying urgent discussions about whether their current approach to interstellar governance might be fundamentally flawed. Commander Vel experienced something her crystalline people had never encountered in their million-year history, the simultaneous certainty that their previous judgment had been wrong, and the complete uncertainty about what the correct response should be when faced with a species that operated according to principles they were only beginning to understand. Her consciousness reached out through quantum channels to access the collective wisdom of every Ashanti Meditation Council, seeking guidance for a situation that challenged their most basic assumptions about how rational beings should prioritize survival versus personal commitments. The response that came back through their shared awareness carried frequencies of profound humility as billions of crystal minds acknowledged that their understanding of consciousness and decision-making might need fundamental revision to accommodate the possibility that humans had discovered something important about sustainable civilization. Admiral Kor felt his warrior instinct struggling against tactical assessments that no longer made sense according to traditional Belthor military doctrine, as his people's entire understanding of strength and courage was being redefined by a species that demonstrated both qualities in ways their war colleges had never anticipated. His communication systems were transmitting urgent reports to High Command about the possibility that human military actions throughout contested space might represent sophisticated long-term strategy rather than reckless aggression, and that treating them as enemies might be a catastrophic strategic error. The Belthor Empire had built its reputation on the ability to correctly assess threats and respond with appropriate force. But humans were demonstrating that their previous threat analysis had been based on incomplete understanding of motivation and objective assessment. High Magistrate Thera found herself accessing legal precedents that stretched back through millennia of Nereid jurisprudence, searching for guidance about how to handle situations where the defendant species revealed information that fundamentally changed the nature of the charges against them. Her people's legal system was designed to be flexible enough to accommodate new forms of justice as civilizations evolved, but she was discovering that human ethical frameworks might represent such a radical departure from established norms that entirely new categories of law would need to be developed. The implications were staggering, if humans were correct that individual relationship maintenance could serve collective welfare more effectively than institutional regulation. Then much of galactic legal theory might need to be reconsidered from the ground up. General Voss experienced something that the Mantis Collective's hive mind had never processed before: the simultaneous operation of millions of individual consciousness streams all reaching the same conclusion through completely independent analysis rather than shared thought protocols. Their species prided itself on efficiency through coordination, but humans were demonstrating that distributed decision-making based on personal values could produce outcomes that matched or exceeded the effectiveness of their carefully orchestrated group consciousness. The analytical models that had predicted human behavior were being completely rewritten as his people realized that individual emotional attachments might actually represent a more sophisticated approach to species survival than their own logical coordination systems. Elder Nyx extended her awareness across multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously, examining potential future timelines to assess the long-term consequences of different responses to humanity's unexpected diplomatic revelation. What she discovered in those alternate realities caused her energy form to pulse with frequencies that hadn't existed in Photon Consortium communication protocols before. Every timeline where humanity was eliminated or suppressed showed decreased overall galactic stability, while scenarios involving human integration demonstrated remarkable improvements in interspecies cooperation. The cosmic perspective that her people had achieved through transcending physical form was revealing that humans might represent an evolutionary advancement in social organization that could benefit every civilization in the galaxy. Ambassador Chen glanced around the tribunal chamber with the patient expression of someone waiting for other people to finish their internal discussions. So, that practical matters could be addressed, then made a final note in his notebook about weekend scheduling requirements. "I really do appreciate everyone taking the time to work through this," he said with the polite gratitude that humans display when others accommodate their needs. "But I should probably head back to Earth soon if we're going to resolve the scheduling issue." The simple statement somehow crystallized the entire situation into perfect clarity for all 5 judges simultaneously, as they realized that this human had never stopped thinking about his daughter's soccer game, even while participating in discussions that were reshaping galactic politics. Commander Vel's crystalline form began displaying patterns that indicated her people had reached consensus about something unprecedented in their peaceful history: the need to completely reverse a unanimous death sentence based on new understanding rather than new evidence. Ambassador Chen, she chimed with harmonic frequencies that carried both authority and genuine respect. "The Ashanti Collective has determined that our previous judgment was based on insufficient understanding of human motivations and social structures." Admiral C. Kor straightened in his seat with the formal posture that Belthor military protocol required for making official policy declarations that would affect multiple star systems. "The Empire withdraws its support for the execution sentence," he announced with the kind of commanding authority that left no room for debate, "and proposes instead that humanity be granted provisional membership in galactic civilization pending successful completion of integration protocols." High Magistrate, Thera's bioluminescent patterns began cycling through complex legal formulations as she accessed precedents for what appeared to be the first complete judicial reversal in Nereid history, based on philosophical rather than evidentiary considerations. Coalition supports establishing formal mentorship arrangements, she declared with the precision that her people brought to all legal innovations, with each participating civilization providing guidance in specific areas of interstellar citizenship. General Voss spoke with the mathematical certainty that came from having billions of analytical minds reach identical conclusions through independent calculation. "The collective offers to share resource management and strategic planning protocols that could help humans achieve their protective objectives, without violating established territorial agreements." He clicked with frequencies that indicated formal alliance proposals. Elder Nyx's energy form pulsed with harmonics that spanned multiple dimensions as she made an offer that represented the first time in cosmic history that the Photon Consortium had volunteered to provide direct guidance to a physical species. "We will share philosophical frameworks for balancing individual values with collective responsibilities across interstellar scales." She resonated with authority that carried the weight of beings who had observed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Ambassador Chen smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose practical problem-solving approach had produced better results than anyone had expected. "That sounds like an excellent arrangement," he replied with genuine enthusiasm. "And I think Emma would be excited to know that her soccer game helped establish better relationships between Earth and the rest of the galaxy." The 5 judges found themselves experiencing something none of their species had anticipated when they convened the tribunal. The profound satisfaction that came from discovering that cooperation could emerge from understanding rather than being imposed through authority. Commander Vel's harmonic laughter created rainbow patterns throughout the chamber, as she responded to what might have been the most successful diplomatic negotiation in galactic history. "We look forward to beginning formal relations on Monday morning," she chimed with frequencies that indicated genuine anticipation rather than resigned obligation. Admiral Kor's scarred features displayed something that might have been the first genuine smile in his military career as he made what was definitely the most unusual scheduling accommodation in Belthor history. "The Empire agrees that weekend family time should be respected in all future diplomatic arrangements," he declared with mock formality that somehow managed to convey both authority and affection. High Magistrate Thera realized that this proceeding would establish legal precedents that would influence interspecies law for generations to come, and that those precedents would always include footnotes about the importance of children's recreational activities. "This tribunal is formally adjourned," she announced with bioluminescent patterns that indicated profound satisfaction with this unprecedented outcome. "And we wish Emma good luck with her corner kicks on Saturday." General Voss calculated that this arrangement had probability matrices indicating significantly higher success rates than any enforcement-based alternative his people had ever modeled. "The collective will prepare coordination protocols for implementation next week." He clicked with mathematical precision that carried undertones of genuine excitement about this unexpected diplomatic breakthrough. Elder Nix's consciousness expanded to observe the potential futures that had just become possible through this remarkable conversation, and in every timeline she could perceive, the galaxy became a more stable and cooperative place. "The consortium believes this marks the beginning of a new era in interstellar relations." She resonated with cosmic authority that somehow managed to convey optimism on a universal scale. Ambassador Chen gathered his notebook and prepared to leave with the satisfied demeanor of someone whose day had exceeded all expectations, then paused at the chamber entrance to offer one final observation. "You know," he said with the kind of casual insight that humans provide when they think of something that might be helpful, "if you ever want to understand how humans really work, you should come watch one of Emma's games. There's nothing quite like seeing kids play together to remind you what civilization is actually supposed to be about." As the human ambassador departed to attend his daughter's soccer match, 5 ancient alien civilizations began planning humanity's integration into galactic society through an arrangement that had emerged not from conquest or submission, but from a simple conversation about the importance of keeping promises to children who were practicing corner kicks.